Let's not waste time here. People like you don't qualify for loans this size, unless you've got a scratch-off ticket in that purse. That's what he said, word for word. And when he said it, he didn't even blink. He just sat there behind that polished desk, in his gray suit and Metro Bank name badge, looking at her like she was the punchline to some joke he'd told 100 times before. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it hit like a slap across the face. Not just to her, but to anyone who's ever walked into a place like that and been judged the second they opened the door. The room didn't go quiet. It went still. You could feel the air shift, like the bank itself knew something ugly had just been said, but nobody was sure what to do with it. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? If you believe respect and fairness still matter, like, comment, and subscribe, because stories like this need to be told. Let's go back now to Atlanta, Georgia. Monday morning, early April, sky overcast, a soft drizzle falling just enough to make the sidewalk glisten. Dr. Celeste Warren stepped out of her car with a calm breath, adjusted her trench coat, and looked up at the glass doors of Metro Bank. She didn't look like a billionaire CEO that morning. She wasn't wearing pearls or Prada, just a beige coat, black turtleneck, dark jeans, and a quiet confidence that came from surviving enough years in boardrooms that didn't always want her there. She walked in without fanfare, just her and a simple black folder under her arm. Inside were all the things banks usually ask for: immaculate tax returns, solid business projections, clean credit, and more than enough collateral. But Celeste wasn't there to ask for anything. She was there to observe, to see, without title or press release, how the branch handled everyday people who looked like her. Because behind that quiet woman was Warren Impact Capital, a $1.6 billion community investment firm that had helped hundreds of families start businesses, save homes, and break generational cycles of being told no. She'd made the appointment under a shortened version of her name. C. Warren. No one at the bank had any idea who she really was. And that was the point. Inside, the branch was clean, well lit, and calm. A light jazz tune played over the speakers. A couple waited quietly by the mortgage desk. A young mother held her son's hand near the ATMs. And across the lobby, a security guard, a tall black man in his 40s, watched everything with quiet eyes. Celeste gave a polite nod to the receptionist. "Good morning. I have an appointment with Mr. Foster at 10. The receptionist smiled, clicked her mouse, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Please have a seat. He'll be with you shortly." She sat, patient, composed, the kind of presence that draws attention without trying. She didn't scroll her phone. She didn't look around nervously. She just waited, and right on time. A man in a stiff suit and a forced smile walked out, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Warren?" he called out. Celeste stood. "That's me." He extended a quick handshake. "Gerald Foster. Right this way." She followed him into a corner office with glass walls. The door clicked shut behind them. At first, it was routine. ID, documents, some light conversation. But then, somewhere around minute 6, things shifted. Gerald started glancing at her file with narrowed eyes. His tone changed, went from polite to suspicious. He asked, twice, how she started her company, questioned the numbers, looked at her like something didn't add up. And when she explained her business model, funding community co-ops and first-time entrepreneurs, his mouth twisted, just a little. That's when he leaned back in his chair, tapped the edge of her folder, and said it. "Let's not waste time here. People like you don't qualify for loans this size, unless you've got a scratch-off ticket in that purse." Celeste didn't flinch. She simply let the words land, sat still for a second, then calmly said, "I'd like to proceed with the application." Gerald chuckled under his breath. Look, if you go forward with this, the system will flag it as a formal denial. That's not something you want on your file. My advice? Withdraw the application. That way. There's no record of rejection. She looked him in the eye and said nothing. Not a single word. Just picked up her folder, stood, and walked out of the office, back into the lobby, and took her seat again. She wasn't done. Not even close. And that's where this story truly begins. Celeste didn't leave. She didn't storm out. She didn't raise her voice or demand to speak to a supervisor. Instead, she walked calmly out of Gerald Foster's office and sat right back down in the waiting area. Same chair, same quiet presence, same folded hands resting lightly on her lap. It was a simple act, but in that moment, it held power. Something about the way she stayed, not out of confusion, but out of conviction, began to shift the energy in the room. Karen Wilkins, the credit officer who sat just 2 desks down, had overheard bits and pieces of the conversation. She hadn't meant to listen, but Gerald wasn't exactly subtle. And now, as she looked over at Celeste, sitting so still, her fingers paused on her keyboard. Karen had worked at Metro Bank for over 11 years. She knew how things were supposed to go. She knew the code words people used when they didn't want to say the quiet part out loud. And she'd heard Gerald say that kind of thing before. Maybe not those exact words, but close enough to sting. She wanted to say something, but she hesitated. This was Gerald's branch. After all, speaking up could mean a warning, or worse. Just then, Marcus Hill, the bank's security officer, stepped in from outside, shaking off the drizzle and nodding to the front desk staff. Marcus was tall, in his early 40s, with deep-set eyes and a quiet strength. He spotted Celeste right away, and his brow furrowed, just slightly. She looked familiar, but he couldn't quite place her. Still, something about the way she sat, unbothered but firm, made him pause. He'd seen that kind of posture before, in his sister, in his grandmother, in the women in his life who'd had to carry their dignity into rooms that didn't always make space for it. As he made his usual slow pass through the lobby, he leaned toward the receptionist and asked softly, "What's going on with the lady in the trench coat?" The receptionist shrugged, whispering, "Loan appointment. Didn't go well. I think, but she's still waiting." Marcus nodded, then glanced once more in Celeste's direction. Something didn't feel right. Back inside the office area, Gerald was already back at his desk, scrolling through his inbox, shaking his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "They think walking in here with a few charts and confidence is gonna fool anyone." His voice wasn't loud, but just enough for Karen to hear. She stiffened. Her hands hovered over her keyboard. She didn't say a word, but something in her gut twisted. At that moment, Daniel Tran, a young associate who had joined the bank just 3 months prior, returned from his lunch break. As he passed Karen's desk, she stopped him gently. "Hey," she whispered, "do me a favor. Just keep an eye on Mr. Foster for a bit. I think we've got a situation brewing." Daniel blinked. "What kind of situation?" Karen hesitated. "Just listen. Be present." Across the lobby, Celeste quietly watched as an older black woman, maybe in her 70s, shuffled in through the front doors, holding a worn handbag and a stack of crumpled papers. Her name was Monique Harris. She looked like she'd seen a few hard seasons in life, but she walked with pride and moved with purpose. She approached the help desk and asked if someone could assist her in submitting a loan deferment request. But within minutes, Celeste could see what was happening. The young teller at the counter looked overwhelmed, flipping through Monique's paperwork with visible frustration. "Ma'am, this form's filled out wrong," he said. voice sharp. "We can't process it like this." Monique, clearly flustered, replied, "I did my best. Baby, this is what the lady gave me last time." The teller sighed and turned to speak with a colleague, shaking his head. "It's incomplete," he muttered. "She probably doesn't even know what she needs." Celeste stood. She didn't ask permission. She walked over with quiet steps, placed a gentle hand on Monique's arm, and smiled. "May I help you with that?" she asked. Monique blinked up at her, unsure. "I used to be a financial advisor," Celeste said, soft enough for only the two of them to hear. "Let's take a look together." She pulled the papers onto the desk, smoothed them out, and within 3 minutes had reorganized them, corrected a few entries, and clarified the missing fields. "There," she said, nodding to the teller. "It's all here now. You can proceed." The teller, caught off guard, looked down, then nodded. Yes, ma'am." Monique turned to Celeste, eyes glistening. "Thank you, baby. Lord knows they don't make this easy." Celeste just smiled. "You're doing fine. They should have explained it better." Karen watched the entire exchange from her desk. So did Daniel. So did Marcus. And so, quietly, did everyone else. Even the customers seated nearby glanced up from their phones. In that moment, something shifted. Celeste hadn't just helped fill out a form. She'd changed the temperature of the room. She didn't need a badge or a title. Her presence alone carried weight. She walked back to her seat and sat down as if nothing had happened. But Gerald saw it all, from behind his office glass, and his face tightened, not with embarrassment, with irritation. Daniel walked back to his desk, leaned slightly toward Karen, and whispered, "Who is she?" Karen didn't answer. Not yet. She wasn't sure, but she felt it. In her chest. Whoever that woman was. She wasn't just another applicant. She was something bigger, something steadier, something the branch hadn't seen in a long time. And though no one had said it out loud yet, they all knew. The moment was building towards something. Quietly, slowly, but it was coming. Celeste sat back down in her chair, calm as ever, though the lobby around her felt noticeably different now. Quieter, more alert, like the whole room had taken a deep breath and was holding it. No one spoke her name, and yet all eyes seemed to glance her way. Not openly, not rudely, just subtle flickers of awareness. Karen tried to focus on the loan review sheet in front of her, but the words blurred. Her thoughts kept circling back to what Gerald had said, and to what Celeste had done. That kind of grace, that quiet authority. It reminded Karen of her own mother, who used to march into offices decades ago, head held high, demanding answers in a world that rarely offered them. There was a strength to women like that, a kind of unshakable presence that you couldn't teach, couldn't fake. You either had it or you didn't, and Celeste had it in every breath she took. Just then, the door opened again. Daniel looked up from his desk as a father and his teenage son entered. Daniel greeted them with a practiced smile, but as the moment settled, his eyes drifted across the lobby, back to Celeste. He didn't know her, had never seen her before today, but something about what she'd done with that older woman, it stuck with him. It had felt right, natural, like the bank had worked the way it should. And for Daniel, fresh out of training, still idealistic, still trying to find his place, it stirred something uncomfortable, because deep down, he knew he probably would have frozen, not out of malice, just fear of doing the wrong thing. But Celeste hadn't hesitated. She hadn't asked for permission to help. She just did what was right. Across the room. Marcus Hill remained at his usual post near the door, arms crossed, eyes calm, but his mind working. As more customers trickled in and out, he kept glancing toward Celeste. The memory was still coming into focus. A news article. Maybe. No. A Foundation newsletter. Perhaps. Then it hit him. 3 years ago, his sister Simone had received a community business grant, enough to start a daycare in their neighborhood. Marcus remembered the ceremony. He hadn't gone. But Simone came home glowing, holding a plaque with a gold trim, the name on it, Warren Impact Capital. And the woman on the brochure? That was her. That was this woman, sitting quietly across from the teller line, reading through her folder like she had all the time in the world. Marcus stood up straighter. He still didn't say anything. Not yet. But he knew now that she wasn't just another applicant. And Gerald Foster had no idea what kind of mistake he'd made. Inside Gerald's office, though, the mood was different. He sat hunched over his monitor, scrolling through emails, pretending to work. But really, he was still stewing. He couldn't believe she'd just walked out of his office and sat back down like that. Not angrily, not defeated, just waiting, as if someone else was supposed to come. As if she still had power in the situation, Gerald muttered to himself, irritated. These people think they can just show up with a smile and get approved for a 6-figure loan? She doesn't even look like a business owner. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that. It probably wouldn't be the last, unless someone made it the last. Back out in the lobby, Celeste continued to wait, not fidgeting, not texting, just present. And then something small happened. The kind of thing most people wouldn't even notice. A boy, maybe 10 years old, dropped a pen near her feet. Celeste bent down, picked it up, and handed it back with a smile. Here you go, sweetheart. The boy smiled back shyly. His mother mouthed a quiet thank you from across the lobby. Again. Not a big moment. But Karen saw it. Daniel saw it. Marcus saw it. And bit by bit, people began to realize this woman was not the problem here. In fact, she might be the only one in the building acting like the place was hers to protect. Then, almost as if the building itself had a mood, things started to feel off. A printer jammed. The jazz music stopped mid-song and restarted awkwardly. The air conditioning kicked on too strong, and right in the middle of it all, an older white couple was called into Gerald's office. No appointment, no folder, no questions. Karen noticed. So did Daniel, and Marcus, and Celeste. She didn't even blink, but Karen was starting to sweat. She leaned toward Daniel, whispered, "Did they have a booking?" Daniel shook his head. "Not that I saw." Karen's stomach turned. This wasn't just awkward anymore. This was systemic, and it was unfolding in real time. And then, a moment that sealed it. Gerald walked out of his office just long enough to stretch, take a sip of coffee, and glance across the lobby. He saw Celeste, still there, and let out an exaggerated sigh. Loud enough for others to hear. He muttered, "Still here? Some people just don't know when to leave." Karen's pen dropped. Daniel's head snapped up. Even the receptionist looked stunned. Gerald just walked back into his office like he hadn't said a thing. But he had. And it echoed. Karen stood. She didn't know what she was going to do. But she knew she couldn't sit anymore. Not after that. She walked over to the front desk, leaned down, and whispered something to the receptionist. The young woman nodded, tapped her headset, and made a quick call. Not a dramatic one, but an internal one. Up the chain. Daniel pulled up Celeste's name in the appointment system, then pulled up Gerald's internal notes. What he read made his jaw clench. Under notes, Gerald had typed, "Does not meet loan standards. Likely not qualified. Better to avoid rejection record. Advise early withdrawal." And yet everything Celeste had brought in, her numbers, her structure. It was textbook. Daniel sat back, heart racing. Celeste continued sitting, calm, steady, not backing down, not pressing forward, just waiting. But the weight of her silence was no longer hers alone. Now, everyone was holding it with her. The silence didn't last long. A few minutes later, Gerald's office door swung open with unnecessary force, and the man himself came storming out, clutching a file in one hand and a coffee mug in the other like he was heading into battle. His face was tight, his jaw set, and as soon as his eyes landed on Celeste, still seated calmly in the same chair, something in him snapped. "You're still here?" he called out, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. "Ma'am, I already told you. Your application isn't moving forward. There's nothing more to discuss. This isn't the place to wait for some miracle." His voice cut through the room like a buzz saw. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Karen froze behind her desk, fingers hovering in midair. Daniel looked up from his screen, eyes wide. Marcus took a step forward, his hand resting gently near his badge, not because anything physical was happening, but because the tension had started to ripple like static in the air. Celeste, meanwhile, didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head toward Gerald and met his stare without a hint of fear. Her voice was low, calm, and clear. "I'm not waiting for a miracle. Mr. Foster, I'm waiting for someone with actual authority." That was all she said. Just that. But the weight of it, the truth in it, landed like thunder. Gerald's mouth twitched, his fingers tightening around the folder. "Excuse me?" he barked. "You don't get to question my authority. This is my branch, and I said no." Celeste stood up now, smooth and deliberate. She wasn't angry. She wasn't dramatic. She was steady, like the eye of a storm that hadn't quite arrived. "Your title doesn't make you right," she said plainly. "And your tone doesn't scare me." The room was absolutely still. Gerald's face flushed red, not with shame, but with embarrassment. How dare she speak back? How dare she not shrink? "You have no idea who you're talking to," he said under his breath, though still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Celeste replied without blinking. "Actually, I do. That's why I'm still standing here." Marcus moved now, slowly crossing the lobby. Not to interfere, just to be near, just in case. He didn't know if things would escalate. But something about Gerald's posture felt off. The way his hands moved, the way his voice kept rising. Marcus had seen too many situations go sideways for no good reason, and he wasn't going to let that happen here. Not with her. Celeste caught Marcus's movement in the corner of her eye and gently raised a hand, signaling him to stay back. "It's okay," she said softly, not taking her eyes off Gerald. "We're just having a conversation." And yet, that conversation had stopped being private the moment Gerald raised his voice. Every customer in that branch was now watching. Every employee was holding their breath. Karen stood up behind her desk but didn't speak. She didn't know what to say. She only knew that Gerald had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. Gerald, flustered now, tried to regain control. He turned to the front desk. "Call building security," he snapped. "She's loitering now." But the receptionist didn't move. She glanced over at Marcus, who was already here, and then looked to Karen, who was slowly shaking her head. "You don't need security," Karen said carefully. "She's not doing anything wrong." Gerald glared at her. "She's being disruptive." Karen didn't back down. "No, sir. You are." That was the moment the room shifted. It was like something cracked open in the air. For the first time, someone on the inside said it out loud. Gerald's eyes darted between them. And then he did what people like him often do when the spotlight turns around. He blamed everyone else. "This is insubordination," he snapped. "All of you. We'll deal with this later." But it was already too late. The power he once carried in that room had started to unravel. Thread by thread, Celeste, still standing, calmly looked around the room, not in arrogance, not in judgment, just watching. She could feel it now. The moment was coming. The energy was shifting. She looked back to Gerald, voice steady as ever. "You don't need to worry about dealing with this later. Mr. Foster, someone else will be here to handle it very soon." Gerald scoffed, clearly rattled now. "Oh, really? And who exactly is coming to save you? Your lawyer? A friend in corporate?" He laughed bitterly. "Please, I've been here 23 years. I know how this works." Celeste gave the slightest smile. "You're right. You do know how this works. But what you don't know is who I am." And that's when Daniel stood up from his desk. He didn't know why. Not really. But his legs just moved. "Sir," he said quietly. Gerald turned, annoyed. "What?" Daniel swallowed hard. "I think we should wait before doing anything else. There's something going on here that doesn't feel right." Gerald rolled his eyes. "Sit down. Tran, this isn't your call." But Daniel didn't sit. Instead, he walked over toward Karen, who was now standing tall behind her workstation. "She's not the problem," Karen said out loud now. Her voice was stronger this time. "We all saw it. We all heard it. This is on you, Gerald." And just like that, it was no longer Celeste versus Gerald. It was the entire room, slowly, quietly, aligning itself with the truth. Gerald looked around, realizing just how alone he'd become in a matter of minutes, and for the first time all morning. He didn't have anything to say. Not really. He opened his mouth, then shut it. His posture slumped slightly, and yet, he still didn't apologize. He couldn't. People like him rarely do. Celeste turned away from him now, gently smoothing her coat, and sat back down. The conversation was over. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to argue. The room had heard everything, and more importantly, it had seen everything. Then, just as the tension reached its highest point, the front doors opened once more, and a man in a tailored Navy suit stepped inside. Shaking off the rain, he carried no briefcase, just a quiet authority in his stride. Gerald looked up and immediately went pale. Karen caught her breath. Daniel straightened his spine. And Marcus? He smiled. Just slightly. Because he knew. That man wasn't just anybody. He was somebody. And whatever was about to happen next, Gerald Foster wasn't ready for it. The man in the Navy suit didn't walk in like a stranger. He walked in like someone who already knew where he was going. He glanced briefly around the room, taking in the stillness, the tension, the way every set of eyes had turned in his direction. Then, with a calm, businesslike stride, he headed straight toward Celeste, and as soon as he reached her, his face broke into a respectful smile. "Dr. Warren," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I'm so sorry for the delay. Traffic was awful. I got here as quickly as I could." Celeste stood and shook his hand like they'd done it 1,000 times before. "No worries, Richard," she replied. "I figured you'd show up when it mattered most." Gerald Foster, still standing nearby, blinked, once, then again, trying to process what he'd just heard. "Wait, Dr. Warren?" he repeated, uncertain. Richard Lane turned toward him now, posture straight and professional. "Mr. Foster, I believe you've already met Dr. Celeste Warren. She's not only the CEO of Warren Impact Capital, but also a key strategic partner of Metro Bank. Her foundation is currently finalizing a multi-million-dollar community reinvestment contract with our institution." He paused, just long enough for the weight of that sentence to sink in. Or at least, was The silence that followed was deafening. Gerald's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His hands, which had moments ago been shaking with irritation, now trembled for a different reason entirely. Karen let out a soft, audible gasp. Daniel's eyes went wide, his mind scrambling to piece together the full picture. And Marcus? He nodded slowly, arms folded, a look of quiet satisfaction crossing his face. "Knew I recognized you," he muttered to himself, just loud enough for the front desk receptionist to hear. Celeste didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply stood there, composed, dignified, and still. The same woman who'd been insulted, dismissed, and told to go buy a lottery ticket, now revealed to be the very person whose investments kept Metrobank relevant in underserved communities across the state. Richard wasn't finished. Dr. Warren's firm manages over $1.6 billion in community capital, he continued. She personally oversees our equity partner network in the Southeast region. This branch, your branch, was set to pilot our next initiative. He paused again, voice calm but clipped. And I've just received a report detailing how she was treated during today's visit. Gerald finally found his voice, though it came out shaky and unsure. "Sir, I didn't know. She didn't identify herself. She came in alone. She wasn't on the VIP list." Richard turned to him, eyes steady. "That's the point. Gerald, she shouldn't have to be on a list to be treated with basic decency. A potential client with proper documentation was insulted, discouraged, and then publicly embarrassed. And it wasn't just a lapse in tone. It was a pattern, one we've warned you about before." Celeste remained quiet as Richard spoke, but there was a quiet storm building in her eyes, not of rage, but of clarity. She wasn't here to shame him. She was here to hold up a mirror, and right now, Gerald Foster was seeing himself in it, clearly, maybe for the first time in years. He looked around, desperate for backup, but found none. Karen stood with her arms folded, no longer timid. Daniel stayed close, head high, expression sharp. Even the receptionist avoided eye contact. Gerald was alone now, and he knew it. Celeste finally spoke again, and her voice was soft, but filled the entire room. "Mr. Foster, when I walked into your office this morning, I wasn't looking for special treatment. I didn't need red carpets or compliments. I simply wanted to be treated like any other qualified applicant, with fairness, respect, and professionalism. But you didn't see a professional. You didn't see an executive. You didn't even bother to see a human being. You saw a black woman and assumed she didn't belong." Gerald looked like he wanted to speak, but Celeste kept going, her tone never rising, her words landing like stones in still water. "You didn't deny me based on numbers or policy. You denied me based on perception, and that perception has no place in the kind of future we're building. Not here, not anywhere." Richard nodded beside her, then turned back to Gerald with finality. "Effective immediately. You are being relieved of your position as branch manager pending further review. HR will follow up with you before the end of the day. I'll handle the staff communication personally." The color drained from Gerald's face. "Wait. Richard, please. I've given this bank 23 years. And Dr. Warren has given it a future," Richard said firmly. "One that you've now jeopardized." Celeste didn't say another word to Gerald. She turned instead to Karen. "Thank you for speaking up," she said sincerely. Karen's voice caught in her throat, but she managed a quiet. "I should have said something sooner." Celeste smiled gently. "Saying something now still matters." Then she looked at Daniel. "You've got potential. Don't let silence steal it from you." Daniel nodded, deeply. "Yes, ma'am." Finally, She turned to Marcus. I remember your sister, she said. Simone Hill. She's doing incredible work. Tell her I said hello. Marcus smiled wide, pride evident in his posture. Will do, Dr. Warren. And thank you. The lobby, moments ago filled with tension and dread, now felt lighter, not because everything had been fixed, but because someone had finally called it what it was. Gerald walked slowly back into his office, not escorted, not yelled at, just dismissed. That was the real punishment. Being seen for who he was, and losing the illusion that he'd always be protected. Celeste turned to Richard. Let's finish this conversation at the downtown office, she said. There's a lot to cover. Richard nodded, stepping aside to let her lead the way. And as she walked toward the exit, every person in the lobby stood a little straighter, not out of fear, not out of awe, but out of respect. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded revenge. She had simply told the truth, and expected the room to rise with her. The next morning, a memo went out to every department within Metro Bank's Southeastern Division. It was brief, no more than 2 paragraphs, but its message rippled through the company like a wave through still water, effective immediately. Gerald Foster had been suspended from all managerial duties pending a full internal review, and interim leadership at the Atlanta branch would be handled by regional oversight. What the memo didn't say, but everyone in the branch already knew, was that the catalyst behind the change wasn't some anonymous complaint or internal audit. It was the quiet woman in the beige trench coat who had walked in without fanfare, refused to be disrespected, and somehow turned a routine Tuesday into a moment of reckoning. And by Wednesday afternoon, Dr. Celeste Warren was back, not to gloat, not to parade around, but to rebuild. She arrived with Richard Lane and 2 assistants from Metro's community development team, and this time, she didn't sit in the waiting area. She walked straight through the glass doors, her presence unmistakable, and took her place at the center of the staff conference room. Everyone had been called in. Karen, Daniel, the front desk staff, even Marcus, who stood respectfully by the door but didn't miss a word. There was no PowerPoint, no legal jargon, no polished corporate fluff. Just Celeste, speaking in that same steady tone that had cut through noise and ego just 2 days earlier. I'm not here to punish this branch, she began, hands gently resting on the table. I'm here to invest in it, because when I walked in here on Monday, what I saw wasn't just bias or failure. I saw opportunity, wasted potential hiding under fear, silence, and bad leadership, and I don't believe in leaving potential behind. The room was still. Karen sat forward in her chair. Daniel nodded slowly. A few others exchanged quiet looks, unsure whether to feel hopeful or cautious. Celeste continued. Metro Bank and Warren Impact Capital are rolling out a new initiative called Human-Centered Finance. It's a training and accountability program designed for branches that serve historically overlooked communities. It includes leadership development, equity training, direct community engagement, and most importantly, a cultural reset. She looked around the room. This branch has been chosen as the pilot site. Murmurs rippled through the room, not of protest, but of surprise. Karen raised her hand, cautiously. Why us? She asked. Why this branch, after everything? Celeste smiled gently. Because if we only invest in places that are already perfect, we'll never create real change. You've got the bones. You've got the people. You just need the structure and the courage to be better than what you were yesterday. Daniel leaned forward now, clearly moved. Does that mean we still have jobs? Celeste's expression softened. Yes, every one of you, with the exception of Mr. Foster, is being retained. But this isn't about keeping the status quo. It's about reimagining what a bank can be. A place that sees people, that listens, that leads. She paused, letting it settle. There will be expectations, standards, accountability. But if you're willing to grow, we'll grow with you. Karen exhaled deeply, the tension in her shoulders finally dropping. I should have said something sooner, she said again, voice quieter now. He's been like that for years. Celeste turned to her. It's never too late to start doing the right thing. And yesterday, you did. Don't let guilt keep you from becoming who you're meant to be. Karen blinked away tears, nodding. Then Celeste turned to Marcus, still standing silently in the corner. Mr. Hill, she said, your sister is one of the most fearless women I've ever met. It's clear that runs in the family. Marcus smiled, touched. I just try to watch carefully and stay out the way. You watched carefully, Celeste said. But next time, I want you in the room. Starting next month, you'll be joining our branch Safety and Equity Council. You've got judgment this team needs. Marcus straightened up, stunned. Thank you. Ma'am, it's not a gift, Celeste said. It's overdue recognition. She stood now, and the energy in the room followed her. We're going to repaint this lobby, update the signage, rethink how this space feels when someone walks in, because dignity doesn't live in big numbers and marble counters. It lives in the welcome. She looked around once more. I'm not here to erase what happened. I'm here to make sure it never happens again. Richard stepped forward now. Training begins Monday. Dr. Warren's team will lead the first session, but starting today, the tone in this branch changes. Celeste nodded. Kindness is now company policy. Listening is no longer optional, and equity is no longer a slogan. It's the standard. As the meeting adjourned, no one rushed out. People lingered, talking softly, some smiling for the first time in days. A quiet buzz returned to the building, not nervous energy, but possibility. Karen and Daniel exchanged a glance, the kind people share when they realize they're stepping into something larger than their job description. Celeste gathered her folder, tucked it under her arm, and headed toward the exit. As she passed the front desk, the same receptionist from earlier smiled at her with something different in her eyes. Not fear, not politeness, but respect. Thank you, Dr. Warren, she said softly, for coming back. Celeste paused just a moment, then replied, the only way things get better is if we stay. 1 week later. The branch didn't look the same, not in the way a new coat of paint or rearranged furniture changes a space, but in something deeper. The tension that used to hum beneath the surface had lifted. The lobby, once sterile and guarded, now felt human. There were new community brochures on the counters, including one titled Financial Literacy for All Ages. The front desk staff had started greeting people with real warmth, not scripted, but sincere. The tone inside was different. Conversations were slower, eye contact was stronger, and people felt seen in a way that couldn't be faked. Marcus now wore a badge that read Equity and Safety Liaison, and his presence no longer faded into the walls. Karen and Daniel had just wrapped their first internal training session, co-led, thoughtfully, with Celeste's team. They'd spoken honestly about bias, silence, and what courage looks like when you're standing next to the problem instead of across from it. And for the first time, the staff felt like a team. They weren't perfect, but they were present, and that was the beginning. Celeste hadn't returned to the branch during the week. She hadn't needed to. Her team was there, guiding, listening, adjusting. She'd wanted the staff to grow into the change on their own, not to follow orders, but to find ownership. But that following Friday, just after lunch, she came by, quiet, alone, no entourage, no press. She stood outside for a moment under the soft Georgia sun, watching through the glass doors as a young woman helped an elderly customer fill out a deposit slip, smiling the entire time. Celeste stepped inside and waited patiently at the edge of the lobby, her presence like a breeze, gentle but undeniable. Daniel spotted her first and smiled. "Dr. Warren," he said warmly. "Back to check our homework?" She chuckled softly. "Just taking the temperature." Karen joined them a moment later, her expression brighter than Celeste had ever seen it. "It's been a week," Karen said. "Feels like a new place." "It looks like one," Celeste replied. "But how does it feel?" Karen didn't hesitate. "Like we're finally doing the job we were hired for. The real job." Just then, a small voice piped up beside them. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, stood near the community book stand, clutching a quarter and a flyer. He looked up at Celeste with wide, curious eyes. "Excuse me," he said, soft but clear. "Are you the lady who bought the bank?" The question caught everyone off guard. Celeste crouched down a little to meet him eye level. "No, sweetie," she said, smiling gently. "I didn't buy the bank." The boy tilted his head. "But everyone listens to you." She paused, then nodded slowly. "I didn't buy it. I just helped make it better." The boy seemed satisfied with that, and Celeste handed him a sticker from the new kids' financial literacy table. "You learn about money yet?" she asked. "A little," he said. "But my mama says I gotta learn about people, too." Celeste smiled at that. "Your mama's right. You get that part down, and the rest gets easier," as the boy ran back to his mother. Karen stood watching, her expression thoughtful. "That right there," she said. "That's the difference you made. He's not afraid of this place. He thinks it belongs to him, too." Celeste looked around. "It does. That's the point." She walked over to the far wall where an old plaque had been taken down. In its place now was a simple framed quote, printed in bold letters. "Fairness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just refuses to stay silent any longer." Below it was the new name of the branch's equity program, the Warren Initiative. Celeste turned back to Karen and Daniel. "You know, when I was a little girl, my mother came to a bank not far from here. She had $27 and a handwritten envelope. She wanted to open a savings account. They told her she couldn't, because she didn't have collateral. She cried all the way home. That was my first lesson in how institutions decide who matters. And I promised myself, someday, I'd rewrite that rule." She didn't say it bitterly. She said it like a memory she had made peace with, but never forgotten. Daniel looked down, hands in his pockets. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Celeste shook her head. "Don't be. Just don't let it happen again. To anyone." She didn't stay long after that. Just long enough to see the boy wave at her through the glass, and long enough to see the team get back to work, not because someone told them to, but because they wanted to. As she stepped outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, and for a moment, she stood still, letting it hit her face. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't tired. She felt clear. Change doesn't always look like a protest. Sometimes it looks like a woman refusing to leave the lobby. Sometimes it looks like a staff finally finding its voice. And sometimes it looks like a little boy believing a bank might actually have room for him. She walked slowly back to her car, her heels quiet on the pavement. She wasn't coming back for a while. The work was already in motion. And as she opened her door, she glanced once more toward the Metro Bank sign above the building. A place where she had once been dismissed, now stood transformed. Not by outrage, not by revenge, but by example. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone you care about. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.